Yesteryear is one of the biggest debut novels of 2026. Written by author Carol Claire Burke, it's been hailed as a timely satire of the tradwife trend on social media. It's a massive bestseller, and Anne Hathaway is slated to both produce and star in the film adaptation. Burke is also co-host of the podcast Diabolical Lies, which examines current cultural trends through the lens of leftism and feminism. As a woman who often leans left and considers myself a strong feminist, I am in many ways the exact target audience for this book. So is Yesteryear worth all the hype it's been getting? In my opinion, unfortunately, it is not. That was for 3 specific reasons that I'm going to discuss in this video. This video does contain spoilers, so if you are planning to read the book, you may want to pause and come back to this later if you're interested. The first reason I found Yesteryear unsatisfying is character. I found the main character unconvincing and poorly developed. The main character is Natalie Heller Mills, who is sort of an anti-heroine. She is supposed to be this very successful tradwife on social media. She has millions of followers who hang on her every post, and they are super invested in her lifestyle, which involves living on a ranch, doing lots of cooking and baking from scratch, raising lots of children, and supposedly submitting to her rancher dude husband Caleb. The book is told in first-person point of view, which means that we are supposed to be in Natalie's headspace. We're supposed to understand her world from within. First person is definitely one of the most difficult points of view to master as an author, because in order to really work and convince the reader, it requires the author to fully inhabit the character's worldview. You have to really understand their personality and their internal dialogue. And in my opinion, Burke kind of failed at this essential task by imposing her own worldview onto the character. What I mean by this is that Natalie never quite feels like how such a woman would actually describe herself. Instead, she feels like something of a sock puppet of how her haters would describe her. She's portrayed as petty, vindictive, angry, and shallow. And somewhat realistically, for a woman who is supposed to be very religious and belongs to some kind of really conservative religion, we never learn what the actual religion is or what her specific beliefs are. She never describes attending ceremonies or engaging in social activities with other members of her religious community. Most we get is like some vague references to God here and there, and this to me just felt super unbelievable for a character for whom religion is supposed to be a fundamental element of her whole life. In fact, in some interviews, Burke has stated that she intentionally left Natalie's religion ambiguous, which I think is sort of a mistake to make as an author, because first of all, fiction comes to life the best when there is that real specificity to characters and to the world. And then also for me, the first-person narration doesn't work for a deeply religious woman because it would require some kind of serious engagement with her religion. She should be attending services, interacting with religious leaders. We would probably see her praying a lot. Overall, the book never really demonstrates any real empathy for Natalie's life and choices. It never offers a truly convincing reason for why Natalie acts the way she does, thus leaving the first-person narration feeling more like Burke's projection onto tradwives than the account of a tradwife herself. Some readers deflect these criticisms by saying, well, the book is satire, it's supposed to be funny, it's supposed to be sort of a tradwife takedown, but I don't quite buy that because satire is supposed to be funny. And to me, the book didn't really feel funny at all. It just felt very hateful. It felt kind of like hate fan fiction of this character, and there is a time and a place for that. There is a time and a place for just like a mean-spirited takedown, but if that's the case, don't market the book as though it's supposed to be this really insightful look into the lives of tradwives, because that it does not do. For that, we would need to see an actual honest exploration for the character's worldview and motivations. And for it to really be successful as first-person fiction, we would need the author to make a better faith attempt at getting into the character's head and understanding her a lot better. The second thing I found kind of disappointing about Yesteryear was that the world building and its exploration of the setting and the behind-the-scenes details of social media was very surface level and basic. So the novel purports to give us this like shocking look into the behind-the-scenes production of tradwife content. We learn that Natalie, who on social media pretends to be the perfect mother, doesn't actually enjoy the day-to-day drudgery, and she doesn't feel much natural affection for her children. She employs numerous assistants who aren't pictured in her social media accounts, creating the illusion that she does it all herself, which is a lie. And in many ways, Natalie and Caleb's supposedly natural gender roles are reversed. Natalie's the one who's really intelligent, ambitious, and has good business sense, while Caleb is sort of this effeminate softie who prefers to be led by someone else. All of this could have been interesting if it actually offered new insights into tradwife and religious influencers. But for anyone who's been online a lot in the 2020s, which likely is this book's audience, because only people who are online would probably care enough to read a whole novel about a tradwife, these exact patterns have already been discussed extensively on Reddit and Substack for years. In fact, I first learned about ballerina farm farm from an interview that Anne Helen Peterson published on her Substack in 2022. And in that Substack, she explored many of the same contradictions in tradwife content that Yesteryear kind of like pretends to be discovering. For the last half decade, Ballerina Farm, which is run by Hannah Neeleman and seems to have directly inspired Yesteryear, has been covered extensively in the media. Numerous commentators have already made many of these same observations, that tradwives are actually business owners, that they often seem to play more of a leading role in their marriages than their so-called submission would have you believe, and that their husbands somehow often tend to be less than traditionally masculine men. People who are interested in the strange phenomenon of Ballerina Farm, which once again probably really overlaps with the audience for this book, they're already familiar with many of these elements of her world, which seem to have been ripped directly from the Reddit threads and plopped fully into this novel. There's the husband whose rich father funds the whole ranch. There's the husband's lack of intelligence, which seemingly parallels how the Reddit snark threads have nicknamed Hannah Neeleman's husband Dim Dan for his often not too bright pronouncements. There's the attendance of a prestigious school, although Burke does swap out Neeleman's attendance at Juilliard for Natalie's undergrad years at Harvard, only for the woman to choose to pivot to becoming a wife and mother afterward, and not focus on a career as much, although she is actually pursuing a career via social media. There's the rampant speculation that Hannah probably doesn't actually manage all of the household by herself and likely has many assistants operating off screen. And once again, this could be interesting if we hadn't already been hearing about these exact things for years already online. And the other thing is, Burke doesn't really add much beyond rehashing these already widespread critiques of tradwives. Also, speaking of Harvard, as someone who actually did attend Harvard, it was painfully obvious that Burke was kind of name-dropping Harvard as a crutch for making us believe that Natalie is intelligent rather than doing the actual work of showing and not telling us that. The scenes involving Harvard were painfully generic and could have occurred on any college campus anywhere. I was also skeptical that Natalie's supposedly conservative religious mother would even allow her to attend in the first place. In the book, the mother's just kind of like, oh, sure, honey, you can go to Harvard. And that seemed odd to me because I feel like people from those communities have this like deep suspicion of coastal elite schools, which are famous for supposedly brainwashing America's youth into becoming liberal zombies. And I didn't think Natalie's mother would be okay with it or agree to let her attend so easily. My final major gripe with Yesteryear is that the big plot twist at the end, the big reveal, which many people thought was really amazing for some reason, to me it felt unearned and unconvincing. The hook upon which this novel is marketed is that Natalie is she's running this tradwife account, but then one day she finds herself actually suddenly transported into the real past, and she's forced to confront the harsh realities of living life in the 1800s. She faces disease, she faces lack of medical care and physical abuse from her husband. This plot point acts as something of a punishment fantasy for people who find tradwife content annoying and disingenuous. Because honestly, it can be kind of annoying to see women romanticizing the past in this way. Not only do tradwives conveniently elide the feminist victories that allow them to even have public platforms and develop their own businesses, they also gloss over the difficulty of the realities of life in the past. I myself have often been annoyed at the way that Hannah Neeleman cosplays farming. She makes it look glamorous and fun, and it especially annoys me when she wears ridiculous outfits to work with the animals, like she's wearing like white blouses and dresses to milk cows. My grandmother actually grew up on a farm, and it was not glamorous and fun. It meant hard physical labor, being encrusted with dirt and grime. They didn't get electricity out on the farm for a long time. They had very limited financial resources. The farm kids never had free time, and the parents had even less free time. In many ways, Ballerina's farm rich lady pretending is insulting and indeed offensive to actual farmers, and it has serious vibes of Marie Antoinette playing peasant. I, and I'm sure many others, have often wished that she might experience being a real farmer from the past one day, with no electricity, no pretty clothes, no paid assistance, dangerous equipment, backbreaking work, and financial disaster if your animals die or your crops fail. Similarly, it would be satisfying to see anti-vaxxers magically transported back to a time when polio or smallpox was ravaging entire communities, so they could understand why we need vaccines and why vaccines are one of the most important medical advancements in all of human history. So it's really easy to understand why the book's concept was so appealing to publishers and readers. But unfortunately, I thought that the concept didn't quite work as well in the execution. The sections where Natalie faces life in the 1800s felt to me a bit thin and underdeveloped. They attempt to carry the entire plot and suspense of the novel, which is the mystery of how Natalie got back to the 1800s, and we are supposed to be really enticed by the question of whether it's time travel or a weird reality TV experiment or something else. In the end, and this is a major spoiler ahead, we learn that actually Natalie had a big mental break after she assaulted one of her assistants and the assistant went public. Somehow Natalie decided that she could fix things by actually living off-grid in a simulation of the past, and somehow Caleb joined her in this delusion. It feels really odd because in the present day sections, her character never quite makes me believe that she truly thinks the past was better. Instead, she seems to see it as sort of a social media grift and a performance. So she's not really believing in it, which this mental break and going strongly into the past would sort of have us believe that the character really did think that that was the right thing to do. It also sort of implies that Natalie was unhinged the whole time, which in my opinion does further disservice to the character because it allows us to simply dismiss her, and it doesn't give readers the opportunity to understand what might actually motivate social media tradwives who haven't had psychological breakdowns. Then in this past version of Yesteryear Ranch, Natalie has more kids who she raises in this bizarre off-grid fantasy. Eventually, one of her older grown children shows up and rescues the current children from child neglect, and Natalie suddenly is sent to prison. None of it quite makes sense, and the reveal is abrupt and unconvincing. So those were all the reasons that I did not enjoy Yesteryear, and I did not find it to be a successful novel. Did you like Yesteryear, or did you also find it to be a little underwhelming? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.